Good morning, everyone. We're going to give it a few more minutes to let everyone get joined in, and then we'll get started with the webinar. Right, I don't see anyone else joining at the minute. Shall I make a start, Steve? So we'll
Sounds
start with
like a plan.
a bit of an introduction. So I'm Mitch Waring. I'm one of the cybersecurity consultants at ARO. I'm based out of our Leeds office and been here for just coming up to 10 years now, I think. And Steve, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi all. Great to be on this webinar with you all. Mitch, thank you for having me on. So I am the director for our solution architects team here at Barracuda, covering Northern Europe. Um, my role consists of talking to organizations day in, day out about their security challenges and problems they face, working out how to solve them through process or technology. I've been with Barracuda just shy of 9 years now. Before that, I did about 15 years as an end user, running IT teams and security teams. So hopefully we'll have a good conversation today.
Perfect. Right. So next couple of slides, I'm just going to go into a bit of detail about ARO as a business for anyone that hasn't worked with us before. So over the past 25 years, we've been a performance partner in multiple different aspects of IT. So things such as cloud, collaboration, cybersecurity. And over them 25 years, we've expanded the business to 9 offices across the UK with roughly 440 employees. And specifically from a cyber perspective today, we're looking after around 600,000 users and protecting them against cyber threats. And that's across 4,500 different organizations. But the next slide, which I want to run through, this is digging into our different business units in a little bit more detail, because we've got dedicated teams that will look after different aspects of IT. So on the left, we've got cloud, cyber, and IT, which is where I sit in the cybersecurity team. But then we've also got areas like our Microsoft 365 house and hybrid cloud infrastructure. We've got a collaboration team, which is focusing on things like business mobiles, connectivity, things like lease lines and telephony systems. We've got a data center services team, and we've also got a sustainability team for helping organizations with things like energy optimization and maybe things like helping organizations across their net zero journey as well. But the next slide in here more focuses on the cybersecurity part of ARO. So on the left there, you can see a list of our technology partners with the likes of Barracuda, which we're obviously going to be discussing today. But we also work with vendors such as Darktrace, Arctic Wolf, and KnowBe4, which are likely vendors you've heard of in the past. But in terms of Barracuda, Barracuda are our longest standing partner. I believe it's coming up to 14 years now, Steve. We've been working with
Yeah,
Barracuda.
yeah, that's the one.
And I think the main reason for that is Barracuda strongly aligns with how ARO looks at cybersecurity. In ARO, we focus on the NIST framework when we're speaking to businesses. And Barracuda's solution portfolio really fits in well within this framework because they have different products that can fit into each aspect of that framework, which today we're going to be focusing on 2 of the key aspects when it comes to this framework. And that's mainly around the XDR products. So we're going to be looking mainly at the detection and the response part of the NIST framework. But at this point, Steve, I will pass over to you to jump into the webinar.
Oh, thank you very much, Mitch. And what a great start covering what ARO do for their customers day in, day out, right? So what I want to do is really shift gears a little bit and start to talk to you much more about sort of the challenge that you potentially see in your organizations, and ultimately how Barracuda and ARO can help and support you. Now, Mitch has just mentioned about detection and response. So why have I brought a slide up about identity? Well, the reality is identity for every organization nowadays is the perimeter. We traditionally had the firewalls that would stop everyone getting into our office, but we flipped that on its head through COVID, and all our office workers are at least hybrid most of the time. If we're in schools, we still have hybrid staff moving around, particularly in the likes of the college and multi-academy trust environments. So now we have to think about identity as being really that perimeter. What that means is identities become the primary target. It was always growing as a target and has been for many, many years, but very much it is the primary target nowadays. Why? Because it helps us ensure who we are as a user. It dictates what I can actually do in my organization. And ultimately, if a criminal gets that information, they can pretend to be you and get access to your systems. So that's why identity is a continually growing target for the bad guys. Now, this is backed up by the likes of Microsoft. This slide's slightly old now. This was 4,000 attacks per second worldwide. Microsoft accounts are targeted. In the most recent report, that figure actually goes up to 7,000 times per second, which is just mental, right? That's how much the M365 environment and the Microsoft accounts are being targeted. Now, how are they doing this? Typically, phishing is still a huge, huge challenge for organizations. So you saw on Mitch's slide there, email security was called out as a specific area. Well, that is ultimately because this is still commonly the most used method of gaining somebody's identity. They deliver a phishing email, they do a bit of social engineering to convince somebody um, to ultimately click a link, and ultimately they get the user identity. Why does that still remain the same? Well, that malicious email with one identity becomes a very easy entry point. And if we think again of the Microsoft environment as an example, or Google Workspace, or whichever environment you're on, actually typically one identity usually grants access to many different systems and capabilities that that user has access to. Once they have access, they typically dwell, right? They typically look, see what they've got access to, hide themselves, and it's not uncommon for organizations to not spot the attacker for a number of days. On average, that's about 3.5 days. And that's because a lot of organizations focus on stopping stuff getting in or forget about the detection and response. Now, how can I show you this, right? How can I evidence what I'm claiming? Well, let's walk through the anatomy of an attack itself. Let's have a conversation about what real world customers of that Barracuda have gained over the past 12, 18, 24, 36 months are actually telling us. And what I'm going to run through is a real world example. So here's what we have. Organization ultimately received that phishing email. That phishing email evaded the protection layers they had in place. So they had email security in place. They had a couple of mechanisms in place to detect beyond the email security. However, it evaded everything and landed in the employee's mailbox. Now, you might say, well, how's the attacker done that? Well, hopefully today we can expose that and show you. So what the attackers typically do is run software. You'll see this is Kali Linux. They've got a piece of software here that allows them to generate a phishing link, create a URL that spins up a website that they're now running behind the scenes. And what they were able to do here is then use this link to generate a very convincing looking email. Now, this is an example of an email that will have got through, right? The customer, the Barracuda customer, who is now a Barracuda customer, they've seen a very similar scenario. It was a mail mimicking a shared OneDrive file, and ultimately the user, being very efficient, decided they wanted to gain access to it. So what did that look like from the attack? Well, the employee quickly reviewed it, right? They were efficient with their mailbox. Unfortunately, they didn't follow their user awareness training that they'd had, and they just clicked the link, didn't check the link, didn't look at where the email had come from, validate the from address, anything of those sorts, and they simply went ahead and clicked that link, right? Just like this, they click the link, and ultimately that link sent them off to our suspicious account. As you can see, looks very similar to 365, but not quite. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Yeah, but I've got MFA and conditional access in place. I'm sorted, right? But as you watch this account, as you watch this here, and as we go through, you'll see that actually the user will give their credentials and actually are prompted for multi-factor authentication. The user, however, authorized the multi-factor, and they simply went, well, I don't want that again. Yes. Now, they got an error. That's fine. Okay. From a user perspective, they go, oh, something's gone wrong. Strange. I'll try that again in a moment. And they typically switch off and don't think anything about it, move on to the next task, maybe come back to it in a little bit. So what's happening actually from while that user has clicked that link and authenticated the multi-factor authentication? Well, what they've done is the attacker has captured the information used to access the M365 account. They've done what is ultimately a man-in-the-middle attack. They have used a proxy service, which is hosting that website to ultimately collect not only the username and password, but the cookies generated for authentication with their multi-factor authentication capability. The attacker then sits and typically hides themselves, right? Inbox rules, we see this frequently. They'll look to potentially elevate their privileges as well. You know, they'll try and do things that will ultimately give them more access, but without leaving too big a footprint that makes them detectable. So what did the attacker see when the user clicked the link? Well, you can see here the software automatically intercepted all the authorization tokens. And then from the attacker perspective, they can get hold of the sessions and they can see all the information such as username, password, whether they've got the tokens, the IP address that it came from, you know, lots of different information. Now, from this system, I can then pull out the authorization cookie. Now, I've just opened up Firefox here, and what we're going to do is take a copy of the authorization cookie, and obviously you can see we've blurred this out, right? So you can to make sure it's safe to show. We simply go to office.com and go to the sign-in page. So we're now on the actual full office.com environment. In our cookie editor, we simply just paste the authorization token and press import. Now you'll see there that's imported all the information from the cookie. We hit refresh, and oh, there you go. We're actually inside of Jack's 365 account. No additional prompts for MFA. We are available, ready to ultimately do whatever we can with Jack's account. Now, typically we see scenarios happen, right? We see malicious email sent from it. We see access to OneDrive and other services when this type of attack occurs. So what did this happen? What happened in terms of the business and the organization and the IT team? Well, actually, they did get a detection that something suspicious was going on with the device and with the account. However, and here's the challenge most organizations face today: resource. And what they were dependent on was an overstretched IT administrator looking at security alerts. He unfortunately was taken out doing something else within the organization, missed the alert. The IT director assumed that the alert had been dealt with. So there was some human error in this whole conversation. But ultimately, they did get an alert, but it required a manual process. So what what did the attacker do once they had the account? Well, they hid themselves and they sat. This actual compromise happened on a Thursday afternoon. About 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon was what we found when we helped the customer look into this. However, it was not till Monday afternoon the actual attacker triggered what he was, what he or she was planning, which was to use the account to try and carry out additional phishing attacks into the supply chain. So when this happened, the phishing campaign was detected, and what we got was actually a customer, an organization ringing us saying, "Help, help, I'm not sure what to do. I've got a challenge. I've got a phishing email coming up my system. I don't know where it is, what's happening, how it's happened. Please help." So Barracuda was able to work with the customer, identify the account that was compromised correctly, get that quarantined, and then also we were then able to trace and find the needle in the haystack of when did that actually occur. So we were ultimately able to trace the whole attack chain from start to finish. That meant the customer could then be confident on what they have, what they need to do and who they need to notify and the impact of the potential attack. Now, what's a challenge here is it also took them 2 days to check over the OneDrive and SharePoint elements of 365. Why? Because they had to check data had not been compromised. They had to make sure nothing had been leaked. They had to make sure there was no suspicious shares put in place. So actually, the time and effort to review was actually much larger than the initial impact of getting a quarantined environment in place. So how did Barracuda improve the situation for the customer, and how can improve the situation for you? Well, there's a number of different areas when we look at that attack chain that we can build out to ultimately build what we call cyber resilience. So ultimately, we can look at the protection layers of the scenario. So we can look to further enhance their email protection capability. Just like ARO's slides, email is a key piece called out. If we can stop it from ever getting in, amazing. But there is a reality. Nobody can give 100% guarantee when it comes to phishing, emails, social engineering, and ultimately anything that has a human being at the end on the end of that chain. So we have other capabilities that we could potentially look at as organizations. We can look to improve detection and response capabilities. So if you think about that attack chain, one of the big mistakes that was made is it relied on a human being. So we can look at how we can introduce additional resource and additional coverage, but also how can we use the likes of automation and AI capabilities that we are all seeing more and more use of today to actually not only detect better, but respond quicker. We'll also look at implementing a zero trust strategy. What is zero trust? Zero trust is all about making sure that those remote workers have a consistent approach to posture of their device, the platforms that they're allowed to access, and ultimately tying their identity to their corporate device. That means that actually, if I get the phishing credentials, I fish that MFA token and the username and password, I don't have the device, so naturally there is not a trust in place. Whereas with MFA and passwords, there is a natural trust of the device that ultimately had those entered in. And then should the worst happen, the attacker gets in, ultimately robust and resilient recovery is key. You need to be able to bring back the information should the attacker be malicious and decide to cause harm in your environment. So these 4 areas really evolve and change the way the attacker can cause impact to your business. Now, just drilling in a little bit towards the detection and response, the Barracuda Managed XDR platform is all about that, enhancing that capability. Now, we always focus as organizations of protection, but detection and response actually is very important. And what we do as Barracuda is we deliver a 24/7, 365 security operations center. We use automation and AI to analyze data coming from cloud, servers, network, endpoint, and email to ultimately make a decision and look for that anomalous and strange behavior. If we see that behavior, then we would take action. So in the scenario of our walkthrough there of that attack the customer seen, then actually what we get is a much shorter attack chain. So the phishing email potentially still gets through the email defenses. Like I say, we can't give that 100% guarantee. The user potentially still ignores their user awareness training and clicks the link and gives their information away. The attacker still receives the information. Actually, if we had the managed XDR in place, what would happen is that suspicious activity would be detected as it was. And rather than relying on the likes of a human to take action and block that account, the Barracuda automated threat response, our automation and AI capability, would step in, quarantine that account, and ultimately the attacker ends up at a point where they can no longer use that account. So they may gain access, but within seconds to minutes, they've actually been cut off from that access. So bringing that detection and response capability in, yes, the attacker still succeeds in their phish, but ultimately you have that automation and capability to protect yourselves and further enhance your security layers. So I guess to wrap up talking about the overall attack, the business challenges that the customer saw. They had limited internal cybersecurity expertise, right? They were also stretched in terms of what they were dealing with. There was a slow response 4 days later, rather than when the impact of the attack happened, rather than when the attack originated. They struggled with centralized visibility. Who was it? Where was it coming from? What else has the attacker done? Right? It gave them a real challenge in terms of seeing what was going on. They did have some alert fatigue around, I'll get to it in a moment. The IT director assuming the alert had been dealt with. And worryingly, they had actually regulatory and compliance requirements, as we all do. But the sector they are in, they had additional elements that ultimately they had to answer about why they had been exposed. These challenges are not uncommon. These challenges are seen across very much every organization, big or small. And so what we've been talking about and what I've been walking through is really how organizations focus on the NIST framework. But when they look at the NIST framework, they typically look at identifying what they have, because it's important. If we know what we have, we can make a decision on the risk. They focus on the protection, blocking and making sure things can't get into the organization. They typically skip detection and response and go straight to recovery. If something gets my past protection, what can I do How can I recover from that impact? But by skipping detection and response, it does leave that security gap. So if you then follow the true approach to the NIST framework and you introduce detection and response into your scenario, what you end up with is not only a protection layer, not only a recovery layer, but hopefully the capability to detect when something evades protection, respond before recovery is needed, and with that end up as having the capability to sleep at night, knowing that you have monitoring and capabilities to respond when you're not necessarily watching those IT systems. And when we look at the detection and response capabilities, the continuous monitoring, that 24/7 capability, the correlation of events, meaning that you can actually build out what's happening, what the attacker did, improve the visibility. When we look at response, we think about, automated response, speed of response. So reducing the mean time the attacker has within the environment. Isolation is key, making sure that actually the attacker can no longer do what they're trying to do. But then also having the ability to do additional analysis after the incident, the ability to call on an incident response team to support your organization should you need it. It really changes the lens on how you look at security when you bring in detection and response. Now, with that, I'm going to pass back over to Mitch to talk a little bit about how ARO are working and supporting customers through the NIST framework.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, from the webinar, as you can see, a lot of both ARO and Barracuda's work is around the NIST framework because it gives you a full 360 view of how you're securing your organization. So obviously the XDR is focusing on the detect and response piece of that NIST framework, but as of right now, ARO, we're providing complimentary cyber maturity assessments where we'll run through all 5 of the aspects of NIST. So running through the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover to get an understanding of what you're doing as a business right now and where that can possibly be improved in the future. And off the back of that, as you can see on the left side of the screen, you'll get an overall view of the security of the business. But one of the main things that will come out of that report is you will have a strategic roadmap on things which we would recommend that you look at as a priority. Because the main thing is, if there's something that requires very low effort, but it brings you the highest return in terms of security, that's probably the first thing that you're going to want to tackle within the organization. So these assessments, as I said, we're doing them completely complimentary at the moment. It only takes us maybe 15, 20 minutes to run through some questions. And off the back of that, you'll then have a strategic roadmap on where you can possibly improve going forward. So if you want to do one of them assessments with us, feel free, reach out to your account manager, or there is a QR code at the bottom of the screen there. So feel free to scan that and we can get a session arranged to run through that assessment with you. But other than that, I think the only thing left, Steve, is the Q&A. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in now and we can cover them. So we do have one in here at the minute, Steve. What area of Barracuda's XDR is protecting identity?
So identity with XDR, there are a couple of areas, right? But probably the primary focus is the cloud XDR data feed. So I think the one thing to be aware of with the Barracuda offering is the 5 points of the shield that you've seen. They can be consumed by organizations independently. So we're not an XDR provider that says you must have that everything, right? We understand that people want to address their risks and their higher risk areas first, and then sort of move into more mature models as they move forward, just like the assessment on the screen here. So what we would typically say is the Barracuda Cloud XDR capability integrates with the likes of M365, Google Workspace, but it also integrates with Entra ID and Google Directory, right? So actually, they are the core. So most Microsoft businesses, the heart of their business is Entra ID. And so that would be really the area that I would say focuses heavily on helping identity. However, we also could consider the endpoint, right? Everyone thinks about identity as the username, password, but actually a device carries an identity that the user uses as well. So making sure that we have coverage in the endpoint as well is also a key aspect of when I think about identity as a whole, rather than just as the person.
Perfect. Cheers, Steve. And got another one here more on the assessment. Do I have to disclose personal information when we run through the assessment? So in the assessment, it is kept very high level. We're not going to be asking specifically what systems you use. It's going to be on a case-by-case scenario. An example question is, how do you respond to alerts if they happen at 2 in the morning? And it's on a red, amber, green system. So red might be we don't. We just check in the morning. Amber might be someone's just keeping an eye on it and has got alerts on their phone. Green bean, we've got a SOC service covering that 24/7. So they're very high level, the questions. And if there's any that you don't want to answer for any reason, then we can absolutely put it as an unknown. And as you can see on the left, there is an unknown section, which is absolutely fine. It's just we can't get an absolute full picture of the NIST framework. So we can go into as much or little detail as you like with the assessment. But I think that is it for questions so far. I'll give it another minute. But Steve, is there anything else you want to run through on the session or?
No, I think I probably just put
There's one
the
more
attack.
question, guys, in the Q&A.
Oh, let's have a quick look. Assuming that email phishing is still the most common initial attack angle, are there any new or indifferent angles that you've seen or responded to in 2026?
Yes, I mean obviously phishing is a huge issue, right? And phishing, everyone thinks about email as that sort of that initial piece, but we do see challenges with like shared Teams chats, right? Organizations being compromised and then Teams being used with phishing links in Teams messages. Slack is another example of where we've seen that scenario. So what we're seeing is the art of phishing remains, if you like. So if we consider the concept of social engineering, usually trying to direct people to a specific place to harvest credentials, that typically is all still in the scenario. The delivery mechanism can change. So usually we see, like I say, email is very common, right? Because it's so easy to try and mimic. But collaboration applications are very much in the target as well, and they are used not as frequently, but we do see them. In terms of other types of attacks, an area that many businesses overlook, and I guess slightly outside of the scope of what we're talking about today, is their public-facing websites, applications, and business-to-business API communications. That is a growing trend. More and more businesses are automating. More and more businesses want to communicate through automation with either their customer base or their supply chain. And it's really important that security is considered in that area as well, because they are heavily targeted, particularly APIs nowadays. Think about if you're creating a mobile app for your phone, that app communicates back to a central place through APIs. If they're not secure, they're up for attack. So we're seeing a few different evolutions, and as technology moves, as you would expect, we're seeing we're seeing challenges grow in different areas. But when you go and look at different metrics out there and different research papers, email still remains as the number one attack vector, just because it's so simple to use. And there are services out there now that you can simply subscribe to just simply produce the phishing email and see what results you get.
Perfect. We've got a couple more as well. So we've got one here. If the organization is running in hybrid mode using Entra Connect Sync, will the automation disable the compromised account in Active Directory rather than Entra ID?
Oh, good question. It will depend on if you have if you have the right back license or not. So probably will depend on your Entra ID license, P1 versus P2. But I haven't actually personally checked. Let me take that one away, and I will, Mitch, if we can make a note of who's asked that, we'll follow up and get back to them through you, if that's okay.
Yeah, not a problem. And last one, I think so far, will the XDR work with my current solutions, or do I need to have Barracuda's technology?
No, so the XDR platform is what we call an open XDR platform. So we have a list of integrations for the various data sources around the shield that you've seen. We integrate, for instance, on our network side, we From a firewall perspective, we integrate with Fortinet, Sophos, etc. Cisco. There's lots of different brands there. And an endpoint perspective, we have integrations with the likes of Microsoft Defender, ESET, Trend, Sophos. There's again, there's a whole raft of vendors there. So for each point, there is a list of integrations that we currently support today. We absolutely do not require you to have Barracuda. Would we love everyone to have everything Barracuda? Absolutely. But we understand that everyone has an ecosystem. They address their needs through the technology they have. So it's very important that we can work with those vendors and their technologies.
Perfect. And I think that is it for questions for now. So yeah, if there's any questions following the demonstration, feel free, reach out to your account manager, and they'll be able to pass it across to me and Steve, and we'll be able to get them answered for you. I think that's everything for today, unless there's anything else you want to run through at all, Steve.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone on the call, and Mitch, thank you to you for having me on your webinar. I appreciate you listening to us. I hope our little story made the cogs turn and made you think about what you are doing in your organization. But yeah, thank you for having me on.
Not a problem. Thank you, everyone. Speak to you later. Bye-bye.